Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week for Friday, April 16th. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, it's a pleasure to do these. The point of the critique of the week is to give that workshop experience to everybody that you get in an MFA program, but you don't necessarily get once you get out of that world. So let's see. James Cicillo is here. Hello, Mark Grenier and Nate Jacob and Lois Perch, Velamair. Let's see, over on YouTube, we got Sally D and D Coleman and Cannon McAfee. Good to see you too. Okay, so we got some people going. Everything's working. I still really find the new Twitter format annoying. It's very distracting the way you have to set these things up. But I think it's working there too. Okay. So now, before we get, I have a correction to make. Last week, I said that the poet was Lindsay Hewish. And actually, the poet last week was not Lindsay Hewish, but Reagan Hewish, Lindsay's daughter, using Lindsay's account. And so the poet last week was 12 years old, which is kind of amazing. If I'd known, I would have gone on and on about how wonderful the poems are for a 12-year-old poet. That's amazing. So anybody wants to go look back at that critique, that's Reagan Hewish. It's very interesting. And I had no idea until after the fact. But anyway, today's poet is going to be Matthew Innes. And Matthew, let's go over here and look at Matthew's poems. The first one is meal making. There you go. This is meal making. And if you want to find more, you can find Matthew Innes as Instagram page at PlayerWright. And then there's like these underscores after the R and the E. So at PlayerWright if you want to find Matthew Innes on Instagram. He's got two poems here. And they're both a regular size, so it should be good to go over both of these poems today. Let me see. Let's see. So we have... Okay, let's do this. Meal making. Half-handed at the stovetop. An eyelash or two torn from a recipe page. Birds wait in line for whatever will fall from old grip. There will be no summer until the taps are turned again, until the forest squawk goes quiet. I open a fresh can, and you ask me another question that I cannot answer. Now there is gold in your hair, and we are swimming through each other. I run a hand across your hip, and the body responds. You're a Sunday that has forgotten all stale process, a cathedral of fire for presence. I am under your arches when the prayer escapes. The rhythm gets stuck in my eyeline. Our hands make bold choices in kitchens and in dreams. You tell me of nightmares, and so I salt them, wrap them in silk, and toss them into the graves where all living things go to find correction. I have not yet been right about more of which I am wrong. But there is sweetness in this one, and she is standing at the stove top with the heat on, wrestling with a question that I'm now sure I can answer. So that is the first poem we're going to be looking at, meal making. And let's start out. So this is another poem. I'm kind of having trouble following exactly what's going on here. I think that's going to be the main issue for the poem for me. So we have the half-handed at the stovetop, and then at the end sort of tells most of what's going on. I have not yet been right about more of which I am wrong, but there's sweetness in this one, and she is standing at the stovetop with the heat on, wrestling with the question that I'm now sure I can answer. So the title is Meal Making, and I don't know, I guess it's an interesting title. I wonder if there should be a hyphen in meal making. But it's at least unusual, and it points toward where the poem is going a little bit. It sets the scene a little bit. So I think it's a good title. Half-handed at the stovetop. So this is the kind of thing that I'm having trouble following. What does half-handed mean? Half-handed at the stovetop. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to make of that. An eyelash or two torn from a recipe page. An eyelash or two torn from a recipe page. Birds wait in line for whatever will fall from old grip. See, I don't know. The lines here have interesting details, but I don't know how to put them together in a way that makes sense. An eyelash or two torn from a recipe page. Birds wait in line for whatever will fall from old grip. There will be no summer until the taps are turned again, until the forest squawk goes quiet. So it's the kind of thing where the details are interesting, but adding them together in a way that makes sense is really difficult. There will be no summer until the taps are turned again, until the forest squawk goes quiet. See, I love the phrase, the forest squawk goes quiet. That's really good. But what does that have to do with there will be no summer until the taps are turned again? Until the taps are turned again. I don't know. I open a fresh can and you ask me another question that I cannot answer. So here's this question that comes up. So the you comes in now, and which ends up being the central sort of other character of the poem. And this question comes up again too. So this is a really important line here. This sort of sets up the stage for the poem that I cannot answer. Now there is gold in your hair, and we are swimming through each other. I run a hand across your hip, and the body responds. So now, once we get into this, it starts to be a little more tangible and a little easier to follow. Even though, we are swimming through each other as an abstraction, it's still an abstraction that you can sort of piece together, if that makes sense. So I think the poem's starting to take off here in a way that makes more sense. Up here, the abstractions are sort of too abstract to leap across the divide for me. Maybe other people disagree. I'm curious to see the comments later. But here, now there is gold in your hair. I'm just imagining it's sort of a sort of creative way to describe the scene, and the way the light's moving in or something like that. I run a hand across your hip and the body responds. These lines are all, it's another really good line. There's a really good sense of like phrase and rhythm in this poem that works really well. So I run a hand across your hip and the body responds. It's a really nice way to put that. You're a Sunday. And then we have this line break here, which is strange. You're a Sunday that has forgotten all stale process. And now we're back into this all stale process. A Sunday that has forgotten all stale process. A cathedral on fire for presence. And why is the presence capitalized? I am under your arches when the prayer escapes. Under your arches. See, I mean, just following along is really hard for me. And maybe it's because I have a little bit of brain fog. I just got the vaccine shot, and it wiped me out for a couple days, and I'm still maybe a little brain foggy, but I don't know. I'm really having trouble following just these details. The rhythm gets stuck in my eye line. Our hands make bold choices in kitchens and in dreams. You tell me of nightmares, and so I salt them, wrap them in silk and toss them into the graves where all living things go to find correction. See, I'm just having trouble following how these details, which all sound good, but they don't add up in a way that you can make sense of. It's sort of like a dreamy, almost, but at least a dream has sort of an associative sense that you can follow through it. There's sort of a thread. Here, it's leaping between, there's these interesting images, but it's leaping and interweaving them in a way that doesn't really add up. I salt them, wrap them in silk, and toss them into the graves where all living things go to find correction. I have not yet been right about more of which I am wrong, but there is sweetness in this one, and she is standing at the stovetop. See, I love this ending. Every time this poem is clear enough that I can follow it, I'm really enjoying it. So when we get to here, I have not yet been right about more of which that I am wrong, but there's a sweetness in this one, and she is standing at the stovetop with the heat on, wrestling with a question that I'm now sure I can answer. This is great. This is good stuff right here, because it's clear enough that you can follow what's going on. So it takes that creative way of turning phrases and the sense of sentence structure and the music of speech. It's a well-written line by line, but it takes that into some place that we can get meaning out of and that makes sense. So it works here, but these other lines are just, I feel like they're just trying to push too far into sort of poetic abstraction rather than letting us in on what's going on. Let's see. Let's see. Let me see what people are saying. So Lisa Allison says the images are good and there's some beautiful lines, but I have to work too hard to understand it. Okay, maybe it's not just me then. It's like the poet is lost in the imagery without revealing the story. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Elizabeth Johnston Ambrose. Congratulations to Elizabeth, by the way, for being one of the Chapbook Prize winners this year. But she says, it felt like a dream, like writing about dream scenes. Hege Anita Jacobson Lepre says, I love so many of the images here, even when they're a bit of a riddle. Yeah, it's too much of a riddle for me. I mean, other people have different opinions about poetry. My opinion isn't universal or anything, but I like a poem that I could make more sense of than this. And it sort of feels like a waste almost, because there are great lines and there's a great sense of rhythm and language, but I can't piece it together enough, and when I can, it sort of sings in a positive way, but a lot of the time I just can't piece it together. It's like it's just pushing itself too far, I think, into let's see. So Nate Jacobs says lots of interesting and nice sounding imagery, but I can't quite follow the meanings. It sounds good as I read, but it makes me say, huh. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And I'm trying to think a lot about each line as I was reading it, but I just can't follow. Mark A. Grenier says, could this poem begin with the third line of the second stanza? Third line of the second stanza would be here. Yeah, I think it could. I think this is the first instance where the poem is clear enough that it invites us in. And so that, it kind of starts here. It could, like this section and this section, are the two that are clear enough that they invite us in and let us get something out of it. And so, I mean, you could make a shorter poem out of just these two sections. There's a lot of interesting details, though. You just want it to be more clear. Let's see. Sharon Frente says maybe more of a mystical story like Cinderella. So Elizabeth Johnson Ambrose again says, I'm wondering if the writer can play with the idea of kitchen cathedrals more. The meal making is a metaphor for something, but I'm not sure what. Yeah, I feel like there's some kind of I mean, maybe we should talk about what the question is. I think the question is sort of, to me, the question was maybe, am I with the right person? Should we get married? That type of thing. That kind of question is how I interpreted that. And so the meal making does seem to be sort of a metaphor for that in a way, if I sort of stretch my brain a little bit and think about how like the recipe that goes into a relationship or something like that. Like there's a sense of that in here throughout. So maybe, I mean, like as a scene that expands to a metaphor, this could work really well. So if we have this stovetop scene, we're cooking the meal, thinking about this question, even if the question remains sort of not completely clear what the question is and just implied what the question is, we still have this scene we can set up and share in an interesting way using that as a metaphor. So I think it could work. I think the setup of the poem is really good. So Mark A. Greener says, who is the cook, or are they both cooking? I imagine it was the you, which is the cook, the person who's, the person down here later who is this one, there's sweetness in this one. She is standing cooking. So I think the scene I imagine is this one standing cooking while the speaker watches and is thinking about their relationship. That's kind of how I imagine it. Let's see. In the first paragraph, this is Eric Zweig. In the first paragraph, the writer speaks of being a poor cook by salting the bad food of nightmares. He is trying to make a better meal relationship. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, and I think that's true. It's just a little too hard to follow. I think that's just the bottom line. Let me see, I haven't looked at YouTube yet. Let's see. So over on YouTube, people are saying about the same thing. Sage Turtle says, the visuals are lovely in the first stanza, but difficult to connect. Also, I do really like You Tell Me of Nightmares, so I salt them, wrap them in silk. It's a strong image that makes sense. Sally D says, feel like some of the metaphors are forced, others are great. And Canon McAfee says, I agree, line 6 could be the starting line. I think that would be a good starting line. Yeah, I agree. That'd be a good first line there. Okay, let's see the other poem, and we'll see if the same issue comes up or if it's just a unique sort of thing that's going on here. The other poem is here. Almost an ape, almost an apple. The future is going to be glorious, full of high travel and high tides. No rewind, baby, baby. I'm so ready for the horses. Of course, Mother Earth is mother. Every mother would kill to protect her. Young Mozart is going to come back on a sound wave and put us all to murder with a perfect pop anthem featuring John Lennon's Ghost. It'll be so contagious and we'll be out like a light, like a bullet to the back of the head. So this feels very similar to the last poem to me, where the language is really interesting and good. And there's an interesting rhythm, too. It's a very stilted, sort of disjointed rhythm in this poem without the punctuation, and even sort of midline, new sentences that don't look like new sentences. I don't know why there's the comma there where there's no other punctuation anywhere else. But again, it's very interesting, but very hard to follow. Almost an ape, almost an apple. See, they all feel like riddles. The future is going to be glorious. Full, and at first I was sort of thrown by this capital F, glorious, full of high, and then I realized that they're just capitals. This is the structure of this poem, is to have no punctuation but capitalize the first letter of a new sentence, which is interesting, but you have to learn that to read it. So the first time you encounter that, it's a little confusing. Like glorious full sounds like a E. Cummings type phrase, but it's actually a break here. The future is going to be glorious, full of high travel and high tides. No rewind, baby. Baby, I'm so ready for the horses. Of course. There's something about this line, baby, I'm so ready for the horses, that I just love. That's really good. I'm not sure why, but there's something that resonates there. Like I don't know. Like there's a way that certain poems work really well by interjecting sort of non sequiturs from the environment or something. And that feels like a line like that feels so natural. And even though it doesn't make sense within the context, it puts you in the place in an interesting way. So I like that line a lot. And I'd like to see more of that maybe. Of course, Mother Earth is a mother. Every mother would kill to protect her young. Mozart is going to come back on a sound wave and put us all to murder with the perfect pop anthem featuring John Lennon's Ghost. It'll be so contagious and we'll be out like a light, like a bullet to the back of the head. The bullet to the back of the head is a bit of a cliche, or at least it's a line that's in a lot of other poems and comes up a lot. So maybe something more interesting there. Again, I'm trying to follow. What does this have to do with almost an ape, almost an apple? I think the problem with poems as riddles is that you can't be sure that there's an answer to the riddle when you're reading a poem like that. And how much time do I want to devote to decoding a poem? I've got a life to live. And so I just want more clarity. There's so much sort of talent and writing ability shown on display here, but I can't get a lot out of it because it's so unclear. The future is going to be glorious. And so Sage Turtle says, could this be about the freedom of a post-pandemic world? And then also Sage says, it does feel like a riddle. Ape equals Darwin. Apple equals Eden. Yeah, I mean, it could be. Nate Jacob says, both of these feel like inside jokes almost, and I totally want in on it because it sounds so good, but I don't know what it is all about. But I do want to. Yeah, exactly. That's my exact feeling. It feels like I'm just not invited in. And so I can't really get anything out of it. Let me try to piece this together. So there's an ape. It feels like if you thought about it long enough, you could figure out what was going on. Almost an ape, almost an apple. So it does feel like a Darwin Eden, like a science versus religion type thing for some. But I don't know how that applies anywhere else. The future is going to be glorious, full of high travel and high tides. See, I feel like when these lines are written, high travel and high tides, it just sort of, like, how do they relate? Except that high just happened to be in there. It feels sort of random. No rewind, baby. No rewind, baby. Rewind. I don't know. Baby, I'm so ready for the horses. Of course, Mother Earth is a mother. Every mother would kill to protect her young. Mozart, every mother would kill. And maybe the pandemic idea that Sage had, I mean, maybe it is talking about the virus. Every mother would kill to protect her young. So the virus is like Mother Earth wiping out the infestation of humanity, which is sort of a poetry cliche itself too, or just a common thing that misanthropy. Mozart is going to come back, but Mozart is going to come back on a sound wave. See, how do we get from Mother Earth protecting her young to Mozart? And then we get this whole riff on music. And come back in a sound wave and put us all to murder with a perfect pop anthem featuring John Lennon's Ghost. It'll be so contagious. It'll be out like a light, like a bullet in the back of the head. I don't know. I hope I'm not coming across as too frustrated, but I find both these poems kind of frustrating because I want to understand them, but I don't. Yeah, as Cindy Bryan Holcola mentions, the out like a light is another cliche too. It's the same thing. Yeah, it is. And it's surprising because the language, even though hard to follow, is very fresh throughout both of the poems. And then that ends in two kind of cliches at the end here. Elizabeth Johnson Amber says, I wonder if it's a found poem. That's an interesting thought. James Priscilla says, for me, the poem doesn't deliver on the title's promise. Mark Grenier says, underlying metaphor is music, I think, or song. Richard Westheimer says it almost feels manipulative, like the poet is toying with us, but has not earned any trust. Yeah. But Eric Zweig says, I love the mystery and physicality. Yeah, there's a lot to like, which makes it all the more frustrating. So I feel very frustrated by these. Hege says, I agree, it sounds like a song or maybe even a found poem using fragments of lyrics from indie pop. Yeah, so I think, there's really not much more to say about these two poems. It's just mostly the language is really interesting and strong, but it's not clear enough. They feel too riddle-ish to get anything out of. And I do wonder if, how much is just my tastes when it comes to this. Are there poets? There's poets that I'm not a huge fan of personally, of their style. Like, I think if you're a fan of Dean Young, say, like Dean Young jumps around in a lot of ways that are really hard to add together. Or, of course, what's his name? Man, my brain is very slow today. But there are a lot of poets who jump around and are very abstract and very hard to piece together. What's the poet's name? Who's the most famous one for that? Oh, Ashbery, John Ashbery. If you are a fan of John Ashbery or Dean Young, would you appreciate these poems more? And I'm not saying I'm not a fan of John. I think that the Tennis Court Oath is a great book, and there are a bunch of other good books by Ashbery and things like that. But I don't know. Like what makes those very difficult to read poems work versus this like riddle-ish poem not work? Is there anybody who's like an Ashbery fan out there? Let's see. So Lisa Ellison says Almost an Apple is a music recording studio. Almost an Apple. I didn't know that. Interesting. So maybe there's a way in through this riddle. Okay, well, I think that's all I have to say. So those are the two poems by Matthew Innes. And thanks again to Matthew. You can find him, of course, at Playwright with the underscores there on Instagram. And the poems were Meal Making and Almost an Ape, Almost an Apple. And do continue to leave your comments in the show notes after the fact if you have any more to add. But that is the critique of the week for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Now, we will have another critique next week, and then the week after is going to be the drawing for the month of May. So if you haven't, there should be a link in the description below the video to where you enter in the drawing if you'd like to participate and be one of the people who has their poems critiqued. So just go there and submit 2 poems, and then I do a random drawing at the end of the critique of the week on April 30th. That'll be 2 weeks from now. And that is all for today. This week's guest coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be... Let's see. Oops, that was last week. This week's guest is going to be Eugenia Lee. Eugenia was the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor winner back in 2013. Her book Blood, Sparrows, and Sparrows is out. She's got another book forthcoming. Just a wonderful poet, wonderful use of metaphor, of course. And that's our Rattlecast number 89 with Eugenia Lee. The prompt for this week was... Here, let me pull it up. The prompt for this week was to write a poem that begins with the following sentence: pull over at the next stop. That's the first line of your poem. If you'd like to participate in the prompt poem portion, pull over at the next stop is this week's prompt. So we'll do open lines after we talk to Eugenia Lee on Rattlecast number 89, Tuesday, April 20th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope you have a good weekend. We'll also do Poetry Spawn live on Sunday. So I'll see you then, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Goodbye.